Hello everyone. I hope you're comfortably settled, maybe with a cup of tea or simply lying back in a quiet room, ready to drift into another world. Today, we're going to explore what it was like to be the emperor of the medieval Roman Empire, yes, the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantium, but not just in a dry historical sense. We're going to walk through the corridors of power, the whispers in shadowed halls, the glitter of ceremonial robes, and the dangerous intrigues that could end a reign as easily as it began. But before we dive completely in, I'm curious. Where are you listening from? And what time is it there? It's always fascinating to me to think that while we explore these old stone palaces and echoing chambers together, you might be hearing this at night, in the morning, or even at a quiet moment in the afternoon somewhere across the world. Now, let's step into the sandals of our emperor. His name, for now, we'll keep simple: Alexios. Alexios ascended to the throne not in a sweeping parade of banners and trumpets, as some might imagine, but under a sky heavy with tension, with rumors swirling in every corner of the city. Even the air in Constantinople, the imperial capital, seemed charged with the weight of history. From the domed roofs of Hagia Sophia to the bustling streets where merchants from Egypt, Syria, and distant Venice traded spices and silk, the empire he inherited was a place of both grandeur and danger. Being emperor was a role unlike any other. Each morning, Alexios awoke not only to the ringing of bells but to the presence of advisors and secretaries who lined his bedchamber with parchments, letters, and reports of armies marching on distant borders. One might think the emperor had time for leisure, but there was no idle morning for him. News arrived constantly. A revolt in the Balkans, a famine in Anatolia, merchants complaining of pirates disrupting their trade routes, the Patriarch of Constantinople subtly reminding him of the Church's influence, and sometimes outright threats from neighboring kingdoms testing the limits of diplomacy. It was a life where every word, every gesture, and every decision could ignite either loyalty or rebellion. Alexios' first council meeting of the day was always the most perilous. Here, generals argued about troop movements, provincial governors submitted exaggerated reports to curry favor, and spies disguised as scribes whispered dangerous rumors into eager ears. Even the walls themselves seemed to have ears, for in Byzantium, nothing was as simple as it appeared. Court intrigue was an art, and survival depended on discerning truth from deception, a skill that took decades to master. On some days, Alexios found himself pondering if it would be easier to rule the entire world outside his palace walls than to control the subtle politics within them. Yet, the emperor's life wasn't just a succession of meetings and letters. There were rituals of power that required theatrical precision. Alexios would don his ceremonial robes for appearances, robes so heavy with gold thread and gems that he could barely move, yet every stitch conveyed authority. Walking through the throne room, he felt the eyes of courtiers and envoys alike, each waiting for a hint of weakness, each calculating how best to serve or manipulate, the man who could decree life or death with a single word. The very architecture of the palace reminded him of his place. Ceilings soaring high above, mosaics gleaming with saints and emperors of centuries past, whispering silently that his reign was part of a chain much longer than any single lifetime. Even at meals, Alexios could not escape vigilance. Banquets were a delicate dance of diplomacy. Sitting at the head of a long table, he listened carefully to every toast, noting whose eyes lingered too long or whose hand trembled slightly as it reached for wine. A careless comment might signal loyalty or betrayal. Rumors often carried more weight than reality. It was said that one particular general, whose name Alexios would remember for years, once plotted a minor rebellion over an insult during a feast, demonstrating how small slights could ripple into matters of life and death. And yet, behind this constant tension, there was beauty and wonder in being emperor. He could gaze from the palace balcony at Constantinople's sparkling waters, where the sun caught the ripples of the Golden Horn, and imagine himself as part of a living, breathing tapestry of history. Sailors' voices echoed across the docks. Merchants shouted their wares in a symphony of languages, and somewhere, perhaps, a poet recited verses praising the emperor, though always carefully, for flattery was safe, but too much praise was dangerous. Alexios also understood the limits of his power. Despite being at the apex of the empire, there were forces even he could not command. Nature's unpredictability, storms that sank ships, floods that washed away crops, plagues that struck without warning, reminded him that all his gold and strategy could not entirely shield him or his people from fate. And yet, it was this very balance between mortal fragility and imperial ambition that defined the allure and terror of ruling Byzantium. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over Constantinople, Alexios would sometimes walk alone through private gardens. Here, the sounds of the city softened, and he could hear his own thoughts. The whispers of advisors, the plotting of generals, the demands of envoys, all faded into the background. He would consider the empire not just as a political entity but as a living organism, one whose survival depended on wisdom, courage, and a touch of luck. Perhaps it was in these quiet moments that he felt both the weight of eternity and the fragile, fleeting nature of life. So now, as you listen, imagine standing beside Alexios, feeling the grandeur and the tension of a world where every glance could mean alliance or treachery, where power was intoxicating but never without peril. Where exactly are you right now? Is it night where you are, making the shadows of your room seem longer? Or is it morning, sunlight spilling across your desk as you hear the distant echoes of Byzantine courts? I'd love to know, because while centuries separate us from Alexios, these moments of curiosity and reflection connect us, making history feel alive. And this is only the beginning, for an emperor's day never truly ends. There are letters yet to read, decisions yet to make, and secrets waiting in dark corridors. But let's pause here, let the city's pulse sink into your mind, and prepare for what comes next. The whispers, the plots, the decisions that shape not just a day, but the destiny of an empire. As twilight faded over Constantinople, the city seemed to hold its breath. Lamps were lit along the streets, casting trembling light on the marble and cobblestone, while distant calls of merchants and travelers gradually softened into murmurs. Alexios, our emperor, returned from his solitary walk in the gardens with a mind heavy yet sharp, knowing that the evening would bring new challenges. The palace never truly slept, and for him, rest was a fleeting luxury. Tonight, the shadows themselves seemed to whisper, some of them carrying secrets, some carrying threats. Alexios' first task was to meet with the imperial treasurer. Money, the lifeblood of the empire, dictated almost as much power as the emperor himself. The treasurer bowed deeply, presenting a ledger so meticulously maintained that it could make a mathematician gasp. The sums were immense. Taxes collected from far-flung provinces, coin arriving from merchants in Alexandria and Antioch, payments owed by allied states, and tributes extracted from rebellious territories as both punishment and diplomacy. Each number carried consequences. Failure to allocate funds wisely could spark rebellion, starvation, or the collapse of military campaigns. Alexios leaned over the table, examining a notation about unpaid taxes from the islands of the Aegean. Pirates, it seemed, had disrupted the collection once again. He made a mental note to address this personally. A good emperor, he thought, must be both ruler and investigator. From finance, the knight moved to intelligence. Byzantium was a realm of spies, informants, and secret correspondents whose loyalty was often purchased by gifts, fear, or careful flattery. Alexios summoned a cloaked figure whose face remained partially hidden beneath a hood. The man's report was troubling. Rumors of a conspiracy in Thrace, a province crucial for grain supply, had reached the palace. Nobles there whispered of replacing the emperor with a governor more favorable to their ambitions. While some might have dismissed such rumors as trivial, Alexios had learned through bitter experience that ignoring whispers could be fatal. He listened carefully, asking questions, parsing the subtleties of tone, hesitation, and emphasis. In the world of Byzantine intrigue, what was unsaid often mattered more than what was spoken. After the meeting, Alexios moved toward the council chamber for a session with his generals. Military strategy was never straightforward. While maps sprawled across long tables, dotted with tokens representing armies, fortresses, and supply lines, the reality was far more fluid. Soldiers could be unreliable, terrain unpredictable, and alliances fragile. Tonight's discussion was urgent. A contingent of Norman mercenaries had landed on the western shores of the empire, and their intentions were unclear. Some whispered of raids, others of negotiations. Alexios had to decide quickly. Should he send envoys to parley, or should he order troops to confront them immediately? A single misstep could ignite a battle, or worse, embolden other adversaries to test the empire's strength. Yet, despite the weight of decision-making, there were moments of unexpected insight. One of his generals, a man weathered by decades of campaigns, recounted a curious encounter in the hills near Thessalonica. Local villagers had claimed to witness strange lights at night, almost like fires floating above the trees. Some said it was a bad omen, others believed it was a sign from the saints. Alexios, while a man of reason and strategy, allowed himself a private smile. Superstition could be a tool, fear, belief, and rumor often shaped human behavior as strongly as swords and shields. Perhaps these lights, real or imagined, would make enemy movements more cautious, and he made a mental note to consider this in his calculations. Dinner that evening was subdued. Only a few trusted aides were present, each wary of the other, each measuring words before speaking. The emperor ate slowly, savoring both the food and the subtle signals conveyed by glances, gestures, and tone. In Byzantium, silence was often more dangerous than speech. A pause, a frown, or an overly eager nod could reveal ambition or disloyalty. Alexios understood the delicate balance. He needed allies who were competent, yet not so powerful as to threaten him. Servants who were loyal yet not blind. Friends who could offer counsel, yet not manipulate it. The tightrope of rulership was exhausting, and yet intoxicating. After the meal, Alexios retired to a private chamber lined with scrolls and manuscripts. Here, history, law, and philosophy awaited him. He studied ancient texts from emperors long past, learning from their successes and mistakes. There were letters from scholars in remote corners of the empire, treatises on astronomy, medicine, and governance. Occasionally, he paused to consider the fragility of life itself. Byzantium had endured for centuries, yet every generation had faced threats. Invasions, plagues, betrayals, and revolts. To rule effectively, Alexios needed to understand not only human nature but the subtle forces that shaped empires. It was during these late hours that Alexios sometimes heard faint knocks at the chamber door. Usually, it was a scribe with urgent news or a trusted guard reporting movement in the outer halls. Tonight, however, a figure entered unexpectedly. A young messenger, eyes wide, trembling as he handed a folded parchment directly to the emperor. Unfolding it, Alexios read quickly. An uprising had erupted near the Bosporus, and the rebels claimed allegiance to a distant noble family with a tenuous claim to the throne. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, yet urgent. Every letter carried weight. Every word demanded a response. Alexios knew that hesitation could be fatal. The empire was like a vast network of rivers, and even a small leak could flood the entire system if ignored. He rose, pacing the chamber, thinking through the next steps. Orders needed to be precise. Messages had to be dispatched. Generals required clear instructions. And yet, he also had to consider morale. The citizens, the soldiers, the palace staff, all watching, all calculating. His decisions tonight would ripple far beyond this room, affecting lives, fortunes, and the stability of the empire itself. By the time the first stars appeared over Constantinople, Alexios had drafted multiple letters, consulted with his closest advisors, and set plans into motion. But even as he prepared for the night's challenges, he knew sleep would be elusive. The life of an emperor was not just a series of duties. It was a constant negotiation with fate itself. And fate, as history often reminded, could be merciless. As you listen, imagine the tension, the weight of decisions pressing on Alexios' shoulders. The quiet beauty of the palace contrasted with the relentless pulse of responsibility. Imagine standing in those halls, watching shadows flicker on mosaics, feeling the hum of a city that never truly sleeps, and knowing that one wrong step could unravel everything. And remember, this is just one evening in the life of an emperor. Tomorrow, new challenges await. Treachery, diplomacy, war, and perhaps even unexpected moments of revelation. For now, let the world of Byzantium sink into your mind. Let the whispers of intrigue and power mingle with your own thoughts, and prepare for what comes next. The night grew deeper, and Constantinople itself seemed to lean closer to hear the emperor's thoughts. Alexios had spent hours preparing responses, sending instructions to generals and governors, and yet the weight of responsibility did not ease. The parchment delivered by the young messenger still burned in his mind. A rebellion in the Bosporus region was no trivial matter. This was not a small village uprising or a minor tax dispute. These rebels were organized, supported by a noble family whose claim to the throne, however distant, gave their actions dangerous legitimacy in the eyes of the people. The emperor knew that ignoring this threat could embolden others, leading to a cascade of insurrections that might engulf the entire empire. He summoned his most trusted general, Demetrios, a man whose reputation for both loyalty and ruthlessness had been cemented in countless campaigns. The general entered the chamber quietly, bowing low. "Your Majesty," he began, "the Bosporus uprising has grown bolder. They have already taken control of several coastal towns and have cut off communication with the mainland. The local garrisons are uncertain, and many are afraid to act without clear orders." Alexios examined the map laid before them. Tiny tokens representing cities and forts were scattered across the coastline. The rebels had established a perimeter, making it difficult to advance without risking heavy casualties. "We must strike swiftly," Alexios said, his voice calm but firm. "Delay will give them time to entrench, and that could cost lives and control of the region. Send word to our naval commanders, block all ports, cut off their supplies, and ensure no reinforcements arrive from foreign lands. Then, gather loyal troops from neighboring provinces. We march at dawn." Demetrios nodded but hesitated. "Sire, if we move too aggressively, there is the risk of civilian casualties. Many towns have already declared support, willingly or under duress, and the population may see our actions as tyranny rather than protection." Alexios leaned back, a shadow crossing his face. This was the eternal dilemma of rulership. Power required decisiveness, yet wisdom demanded care. "We will minimize harm," he said, "but we cannot allow fear of imperfection to paralyze action. The people may resent us temporarily, but a disunited empire will bring far greater suffering." As the general departed to prepare the forces, Alexios moved to the palace balcony. The moon cast a silver glow over the city, illuminating domes, spires, and the distant ripples of the Golden Horn. In the quiet, he reflected on how often the fates of empires turned on decisions made in these solitary hours. He remembered the tales of emperors past, some who had been betrayed in sleep, others who had died from illness or assassination because they underestimated the ambition of those around them. History was not gentle nor forgiving. It was a constant reminder that rule demanded vigilance, cunning, and sometimes ruthlessness. Suddenly, a soft knock interrupted his contemplation. A young scribe, barely out of adolescence, entered, clutching another letter. Alexios took it carefully. It bore no seal of rebellion or diplomacy. Rather, it was a personal note, written by a distant cousin of one of the rebel leaders. The message was delicate. Some of the rebels were hesitant, unsure of their loyalty, and could be persuaded to abandon the cause if approached correctly. This was a rare opportunity, and Alexios recognized it immediately. War was often about timing, and knowing when to negotiate could save blood and preserve the empire's strength. By the early hours, Alexios had crafted a plan that balanced force and diplomacy. A select envoy would be dispatched under the cover of night to contact hesitant rebels, offering safe passage and pardon if they surrendered. Simultaneously, loyal troops would advance quietly toward key positions, prepared to suppress the uprising if persuasion failed. Every step had to be precise. A single misjudgment could turn potential allies into enemies, or worse, trigger panic and rebellion in other regions. Despite the careful planning, Alexios could not ignore the human cost. He thought of families in coastal towns, their lives disrupted, their futures uncertain. The weight of decisions pressed heavily on him. Yet he reminded himself that an emperor's burden was never light. In moments of quiet reflection, he wondered what his life would be like without the crown. Perhaps a scholar, a traveler, or even a simple citizen. But the thought was fleeting. Destiny had chosen him, and retreat was not an option. As dawn approached, the city began to stir. The first rays of sunlight illuminated Constantinople's walls, and the calls of merchants and laborers gradually returned. Alexios dressed in his armor for inspection, the metal glinting faintly in the morning light. He walked through the courtyard where soldiers were assembling, observing their discipline, their readiness. Every glance he cast was measured. Every word was deliberate. Leadership, he knew, was as much about presence and perception as it was about orders. By mid-morning, the envoy had departed, and loyal forces were in position. Reports began to filter in. Some rebels were swayed, abandoning their posts quietly. Others resisted, forcing small skirmishes along the coast. Alexios observed from a distance, knowing that the outcome of this conflict would ripple across the empire. Success would reinforce his authority. Failure could embolden enemies far beyond the Bosporus. Yet even in the tension, there was exhilaration. A sense of participating in history itself, shaping events that would be remembered for generations. And as the day unfolded, Alexios could feel the subtle shifts in the air. Whispers of admiration, grudging respect from rivals, and the cautious hope of citizens who looked to the emperor as both protector and arbiter. Power, he realized, was not a static thing. It flowed, ebbed, and demanded constant attention. One misstep, one misplaced word, and it could vanish. Yet mastery of this delicate balance was precisely what separated a ruler from a tyrant, a successful reign from a fleeting moment of authority. As you listen, picture the chaos and strategy intertwining, the tension of battle and negotiation, the quiet calculation of a ruler who must weigh every human life alongside the fate of the empire. Imagine standing beside Alexios as he watches from a balcony, knowing that history is being written in real time, every choice carrying consequences beyond imagination. And remember, this is far from the end. The Bosporus is only the beginning. More challenges, betrayals, and unexpected revelations await our emperor. The life of an emperor is a river without end, and we are only at its first rapid twists. The days following the initial moves against the Bosporus rebels were tense beyond description. Constantinople itself seemed to hold its breath, as if the city could sense the unfolding drama miles away on its coasts. Alexios, ever vigilant, spent hours in the war council, moving pieces on the map with calculated precision. Reports arrived from scouts and spies, each detail carrying weight. The number of men loyal to the rebel cause, the layout of fortifications, the response of villagers, and even rumors of foreign sympathizers plotting to intervene. Nothing could be taken lightly. In Byzantium, information itself could be a weapon, and ignorance was fatal. By mid-morning, the first skirmishes broke out along narrow coastal roads where rebels attempted to intercept supply caravans. Loyal troops, under Demetrios' command, met them with disciplined formations and strategic ambushes. From the palace, Alexios observed through a combination of reports and vantage points, understanding that leadership demanded both presence and trust. He could not personally fight, but every move he ordered rippled across the battlefield, influencing the outcome of lives and loyalties. The clash was brutal yet precise. The rebel forces were not a ragtag band but well-organized and desperate, fighting not only for territory but for recognition and survival. Amid the chaos, Alexios received urgent news from his envoy. Several of the hesitant rebels had agreed to negotiations, willing to surrender their posts in exchange for amnesty. This was a rare but critical victory, and Alexios seized upon it. He instructed Demetrios to hold strategic positions while allowing the defectors to retreat safely. Mercy, when applied carefully, could strengthen authority more than fear alone. Byzantium had long relied on a balance of respect, strategy, and intimidation. An emperor's skill lay in knowing when to apply each. Even as the day progressed, shadows of treachery lingered. Rumors filtered back to the palace that certain nobles within Constantinople were quietly sympathizing with the rebels. calculating that if Alexios faltered, they might claim advantage. The emperor knew the city itself was a chessboard, each influential figure a piece whose allegiance could shift like the tides. He convened a private council with his closest advisors, analyzing intelligence reports, cross-examining messengers, and confirming the loyalty of palace guards. In Byzantium, the line between friend and foe was razor-thin, and a single miscalculation could cost more than a military defeat, could threaten the very throne. In the late afternoon, as the sun slanted through the palace windows, Alexios made a rare personal appearance at a strategic checkpoint near the harbor. Soldiers and local citizens alike felt a surge of both awe and reassurance. The emperor's presence was more than ceremonial. It was a tangible assertion of control. Citizens whispered among themselves, speculating on his mood, the firmness of his gaze, the subtle movements of his hand. In Byzantium, an emperor's demeanor could inspire loyalty or fear in equal measure, and Alexios knew this better than anyone. Meanwhile, Demetrios sent constant updates. The coastal roads were secured, rebel numbers dwindling, and some factions were retreating toward isolated hill forts. Yet with each victory, new questions arose. Would the remaining rebels regroup? Could foreign powers take advantage of the unrest? Alexios, in his private chambers that evening, reviewed every report with meticulous care. Maps were annotated with notes, letters were dispatched, and spies were repositioned. Even as he worked, he pondered the broader consequences of each tactical decision, not only for the Bosporus but for the empire as a whole. A single ripple in the water could become a wave across provinces far beyond the rebellion's origin. As night fell, the emperor allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. From a balcony overlooking the harbor, he observed the flickering torches of watchmen along the water, the movement of small boats ferrying supplies, and the distant silhouettes of the hills where rebels had fled. The calm of night contrasted sharply with the tension of the day. He thought of the lives affected by this conflict, soldiers, families, and citizens caught between loyalty and survival. Leadership, Alexios reflected, was not simply about strategy. It was about understanding the human heart, predicting desires and fears, and sometimes guiding decisions with a gentle hand rather than a firm sword. In the quiet hours, a subtle message arrived from the envoy. One faction of rebels was considering surrender, but feared retribution from the noble family backing the rebellion. Alexios recognized the opportunity and ordered a small contingent to escort them safely back to loyalist territory. It was a delicate maneuver, balancing authority with clemency. Byzantium thrived on such intricate measures. Power wielded clumsily could topple even the most enduring empires. The day ended with a cautious sense of progress. The rebellion was not fully quelled, but the empire had regained crucial control, and Alexios' strategic patience was beginning to bear fruit. Yet he could not celebrate. In Byzantium, no victory was ever absolute, and history had shown that even minor complacency could allow treachery to fester. The emperor prepared letters for distant governors, reaffirming loyalty and readiness, and gave final orders to ensure the city's defenses were secure. Even as he finally sought a few hours of rest, Alexios remained alert to the faintest sound. A misplaced footstep, an unexpected knock, the whisper of uncertainty. The life of an emperor was a river of vigilance, flowing endlessly, each decision carrying the weight of countless lives. As you imagine this world, picture the tension, the strategy, and the constant need for foresight. Picture standing in the halls beside him, feeling both awe and unease, understanding that history is not only recorded by battles and treaties, but by the silent, careful choices of those who wield power. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rumors, and perhaps new betrayals. But for tonight, the emperor's careful strategies held the empire intact, and for a brief moment, the fragile balance of authority was preserved. And yet, the whispers in the shadows reminded Alexios that no reign, however skillful, could ever truly rest easy. The morning after the initial successes in the Bosporus region began with an uneasy calm. Constantinople, bathed in soft dawn light, seemed to breathe slowly, as if recovering from a tension-filled night. Alexios, however, felt no relief. The skirmishes had revealed only part of the rebels' plan, and intelligence reports hinted at a darker, more coordinated strategy unfolding. The noble family backing the rebellion had sent emissaries to several distant provinces, attempting to sow discord and recruit additional forces. Even small towns far from the coast were not immune to their influence. The emperor understood immediately that what had seemed like a contained uprising could rapidly evolve into a crisis threatening the entire empire. Alexios convened his advisors in the palace war chamber. The room, lined with maps and mosaics depicting past emperors, hummed with a quiet intensity. Each advisor's voice carried weight, and every word was scrutinized for both meaning and implication. "We must anticipate their next moves," Alexios began, his gaze sweeping over the council. "This is no ordinary rebellion. They are testing the loyalty of our governors, measuring our responses, and watching for weakness. Delay or miscalculation could allow them to expand their influence beyond the Bosporus, threatening trade, communication, and even the stability of the capital." One advisor, a veteran statesman named Nikolaos, spoke cautiously. "Sire, if we act too swiftly, we risk alienating the population. Some towns may see our troops as oppressors rather than protectors. And yet, hesitation may embolden the rebels further." Alexios leaned forward, resting a hand on the polished table. "We shall combine firmness with diplomacy. Troops will maintain strict order, avoiding unnecessary violence, while envoys continue negotiations where possible. Any surrender will be honored fully to reinforce loyalty and trust. But make no mistake, those who resist after ample opportunity will face consequences. Byzantium cannot allow hesitation or cowardice to dictate policy." The emperor then turned to military strategy. Demetrios, ever reliable, presented updated maps and troop positions. "Sire, we have secured the coastal towns, but reports indicate rebels gathering in the interior hills. They are establishing fortifications and recruiting local militias. Should we advance immediately or wait for reinforcements?" Alexios studied the map carefully. Hills provided natural defense, but delaying could give the rebels time to consolidate power. "We advance at first light," he decided. "Our forces must be swift, coordinated, and precise. No unnecessary risk to civilians, but no leniency for resistance. Ensure scouts monitor all approaches. I want full situational awareness before any engagement." As the council dispersed, Alexios retreated briefly to his private chambers. The weight of command pressed upon him as heavily as the ceremonial robes he often wore for appearances. He considered the lives dependent on his decisions, soldiers, civilians, and even those rebels who might yet be persuaded to surrender. The line between mercy and authority was delicate. Misjudgment could cost not only the lives of many, but also the emperor's credibility. In Byzantium, perception of strength was as important as actual power, and Alexios understood that the empire would crumble faster from doubt than from any army. By late morning, he received troubling news from the northern provinces. A small contingent of troops previously loyal to the empire had defected to the rebel cause, swayed either by bribes or fear. Alexios clenched his fists, feeling the familiar surge of tension. Betrayal was the silent predator of empires. He immediately dispatched trusted officers to reassert control, offering amnesty to those willing to return and warning others that treason would not be tolerated. Even as he acted, he pondered the subtle psychology of loyalty, the delicate interplay of fear, respect, and genuine allegiance that determined the stability of Byzantium. The afternoon brought another challenge. A messenger arrived bearing a sealed letter from the rebel noble family. The contents were bold. They demanded a formal negotiation, threatening increased violence if ignored. Alexios read the words slowly, noting both the arrogance and the subtle hints of desperation. This was not merely a political maneuver, it was a psychological test. The rebels sought to gauge his reaction, to measure his willingness to bend or falter. He set the letter aside carefully, considering his response. Diplomacy was a weapon in its own right, and timing was crucial. Respond too quickly, and it might appear weakness. Wait too long, and it might embolden them. As the sun dipped low, Alexios ventured once more into the palace gardens. The scent of night-blooming flowers mingled with the distant sounds of Constantinople preparing for evening. Here, away from the maps, letters, and advisors, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. History, he thought, was written not only by victories in battle but by the subtle maneuvers of those who understood human nature, the ebb and flow of power, and the weight of responsibility. The life of an emperor was a continuous balancing act, a constant negotiation between authority and compassion, between fear and respect. Even as he walked, his mind remained alert to the whispers of the city, the hidden currents of ambition and treachery that flowed beneath the surface. Byzantium, despite its grandeur, was fragile. A single rebellion, poorly managed, could inspire dozens more. Every choice, from troop deployment to diplomatic correspondence, carried ramifications far beyond immediate perception. Alexios understood that leadership required not only strategy but intuition, patience, and the courage to make difficult decisions when no path seemed entirely safe. Night fell, and the palace settled into a tense quiet. Yet sleep was elusive for Alexios. Reports continued to arrive from scouts and envoys, each one a thread in a vast tapestry of information that demanded constant attention. The Bosporus rebellion, though partially contained, was far from over. Loyal towns remained under threat, isolated units risked being cut off, and the shadow of the noble family's influence stretched ominously across the provinces. Alexios drafted orders for renewed coordination among his generals, letters to reaffirm loyalty among governors, and instructions for the careful handling of defectors. Each word, each command, carried weight that could tip the balance of fortune in the empire's favor or lead to disaster. As you imagine this world, picture the relentless pressure, the unending vigilance, and the intricate web of decisions faced by an emperor. Stand beside Alexios in the palace halls, feel the weight of responsibility pressing upon him, and sense the tension between mercy and authority, loyalty and betrayal. The life of an emperor is never simple, and every day carries new challenges, unseen threats, and unexpected opportunities. And remember, the rebellion is far from concluded. Each choice, each movement, and each negotiation shapes the destiny of an empire that has endured for centuries, yet remains perpetually vulnerable to ambition, miscalculation, and fate itself. The following day dawned over Constantinople with a gray, almost foreboding sky. Alexios had barely slept, his mind alive with calculations, contingencies, and the subtle dynamics of loyalty and betrayal. Reports arrived continuously, some trivial, others of immense consequence. A small merchant vessel had been intercepted near the Bosporus, carrying letters hinting at coordinated attacks from sympathetic nobles in the northern provinces. Another report indicated that some towns along the coast were stockpiling supplies in secret, potentially to support the rebels if the situation escalated. Every detail mattered, and Alexios absorbed each fragment of intelligence with relentless focus, knowing that the empire's fate depended on decisions made in moments like these. He convened a full military council in the throne room, where sunlight fell through stained glass, casting colorful patterns on the marble floor. Generals, advisors, and scribes filled the chamber, their voices overlapping in a chorus of concern and suggestion. Alexios listened carefully, weighing every word. He understood that a strong leader must act decisively yet remain open to counsel. "The rebels are not merely fighting for land," he said, his voice firm, carrying over the murmurs of the council. "They seek legitimacy, alliances, and recognition. We must deny them these while maintaining the support of those yet undecided. Timing, strategy, and perception are equally important." The discussion turned to troop movements. Demetrios outlined options. A swift assault could catch the rebels off guard but risk significant casualties, while a slower, calculated advance would minimize risk but give the enemy time to fortify positions. Alexios considered the human cost. The lives of soldiers, the well-being of civilians, and the reputation of the empire. Leadership in Byzantium required both wisdom and ruthlessness, and he knew that the margin for error was thin. "We advance in stages," he commanded, Scouts secure key positions. Envoys continue outreach to potential defectors. And our forces remain disciplined. Any unnecessary harm to civilians will not be tolerated. Balance is key. Even as plans solidified, Alexios could feel the weight of anticipation. Rebellions often escalated unpredictably. A single act of courage or betrayal could change everything. He remembered the lessons of past emperors. Some were undone not by the enemy but by their own indecision, by failing to perceive subtle signs of disloyalty. He reviewed reports of the nobles in the capital, cross-checking their statements and observing their interactions. In Byzantium, appearance often masked intention, and a subtle glance or carefully chosen phrase could betray ambition. By midday, the first skirmishes intensified. Loyalist forces moved cautiously through coastal roads and wooded hills, confronting rebel units with precision. Alexios monitored the engagements through messengers and scouts, piecing together the unfolding events. The rebels were resilient, employing guerrilla tactics to slow progress and harass supply lines. Yet, with disciplined strategy and timely reinforcements, loyal troops gradually regained control of key positions. Each small victory strengthened morale, but the emperor knew this was only the beginning. As afternoon stretched into evening, news arrived of a daring maneuver by the rebels. They had attempted to cut off a supply route to a strategic fort along the Bosporus. Alexios's mind raced. This was a calculated risk by the enemy, testing his response. He immediately ordered a detachment of cavalry to intercept and secure the route, while simultaneously dispatching a second unit to reinforce the threatened fort. Such rapid coordination required both trust in his generals and meticulous attention to timing. A single delay could result in disaster. While overseeing these maneuvers, Alexios reflected on the personal dimension of leadership. Each decision bore consequences not only for the empire but for the lives of those who served him. Soldiers were more than pawns. They were individuals, families, and citizens whose loyalty depended on respect, strategy, and occasionally, mercy. The human element was ever present. Byzantium thrived on careful management of hearts and minds as much as it did on military might. Nightfall brought new intelligence. The envoy returning from secret negotiations reported that several rebel leaders were increasingly fearful of retribution from their own noble backers. Their resolve wavered, presenting an opportunity. Alexios seized upon it immediately, drafting precise instructions for envoys to offer safe surrender and reintegration into loyalist forces. Diplomacy, subtle and carefully executed, could achieve what force alone could not. The balance of power in the Bosporus region might yet tilt decisively in favor of the empire without excessive bloodshed. Even as he worked through the night, Alexios sensed the fragile tension underlying every action. The city of Constantinople itself seemed to hum with awareness, as though the walls and streets absorbed the anxieties and ambitions of its ruler. Every decision, from troop deployment to negotiation, required foresight, patience, and the capacity to weigh consequences not immediately visible. Leadership in Byzantium was as much about predicting human behavior as it was about commanding armies. A misstep could ignite unrest far beyond the initial rebellion, drawing distant provinces into chaos. By the early hours, a pattern began to emerge. Some rebel units surrendered quietly, persuaded by envoys and promises of mercy. Others resisted, engaging loyalist troops in brief but intense skirmishes. Alexios monitored the situation meticulously, adjusting strategy in real time. He recognized that success depended not only on military prowess but on perception, diplomacy, and the careful calibration of fear and respect. Byzantium had survived for centuries because its leaders understood this subtle interplay, and Alexios was determined to continue that legacy. As you listen, imagine the complexity, the tension, and the constant mental calculations that accompany the life of an emperor. Picture Alexios standing in his chambers or on a palace balcony, eyes fixed on distant hills, weighing human emotion, military strategy, and the fragile thread of authority that held the empire together. Leadership was never static. It flowed like a river, requiring continuous attention, adaptability, and courage. And yet, even amid cautious victories, Alexios knew that the rebellion was far from over. Every decision made today could shape events for weeks, months, or even years. The delicate balance of loyalty, fear, and strategy would be tested repeatedly, and the true measure of an emperor lay not only in the battles he won, but in the subtle, unseen forces he could influence. The story of Byzantium's survival was being written, and Alexios remained at the center, navigating a world where power, ambition, and human nature intertwined endlessly. The night after the initial skirmishes had settled brought no real rest for Alexios. Even in the quiet hours, the city of Constantinople seemed alive with movement, and whispers of the rebellion echoed faintly through the corridors of power. The reports from the Bosporus region grew more complex. While some rebel factions had quietly surrendered, others had regrouped unexpectedly, showing greater organization and coordination than intelligence had predicted. It became clear to Alexios that he was facing not just a collection of rebels, but a carefully orchestrated challenge designed to test both his strategic skill and the loyalty of his generals. In the early hours before dawn, Alexios convened a secret council. The chamber was dimly lit, the mosaic tiles glinting faintly in the torchlight, casting shadows that flickered across the walls. Only his closest advisors were present, men whose loyalty had been proven over decades, yet he remained vigilant. The rebels are more resourceful than we anticipated. Alexios began, his voice steady but sharp. They are testing us on multiple fronts: morale, loyalty, perception. We cannot afford missteps. A senior general, Lysandros, spoke cautiously. Sire, if we push forward aggressively, we risk heavy casualties. But if we hesitate, their organization will only grow stronger. Some factions have begun to receive secret support from outside the empire, likely from distant allies of the noble family backing this rebellion. Alexios nodded, absorbing the weight of the situation. Every decision carried consequences beyond the battlefield. He understood that even a minor tactical error could inspire doubt among governors, soldiers, and citizens alike. Leadership in Byzantium required a careful equilibrium, displaying strength without cruelty, decisiveness without recklessness, and authority without arrogance. Every move was a calculation, every word a message. By mid-morning, news arrived of an unexpected development. A small town previously loyal to the empire had secretly opened its gates to the rebels, offering supplies and shelter. Alexios' brow furrowed. This was the type of subtle betrayal that could unravel months of careful strategy. He immediately dispatched a contingent of troops to secure the town and establish control, while simultaneously sending envoys to reassure the remaining loyal citizens that the emperor valued their allegiance and would protect them. In Byzantium, perception was as crucial as force. A town's loyalty could be fragile, shifting with the slightest hint of weakness or neglect. Meanwhile, the rebels had begun employing more sophisticated tactics. Scouts reported that they were setting traps along narrow passes, using the terrain to their advantage, and even attempting to intercept messages to and from loyalist commanders. Alexios, recognizing the need for careful counter-strategy, instructed Demetrios to deploy small, flexible units capable of responding quickly while minimizing exposure. Every movement had to be calculated, every decision weighed against both immediate and long-term consequences. As the day progressed, Alexios received intelligence from an unexpected source. A former associate of the rebel noble family, disillusioned by their ambition, had offered secret information on the rebels' plans. This intelligence was delicate, potentially misleading, and yet invaluable if used correctly. Alexios pondered the implications. Trust was a commodity rarer than gold in Byzantium, and even the most promising intelligence could conceal betrayal. He decided to act cautiously, cross-referencing reports with scouts' observations and sending small detachments to test the accuracy of the claims. By late afternoon, the first significant confrontation occurred. Rebel forces attempted to seize a strategic hill overlooking the coastal road, intending to disrupt supply lines and control troop movements. Loyalist forces, positioned according to Alexios' orders, met them with disciplined formations and well-coordinated maneuvers. The clash was intense but controlled, with neither side able to secure a decisive advantage initially. From the palace, Alexios received detailed reports every hour, adjusting strategy as necessary. The battle, though distant from the city, felt immediate to him. Every loss, every gain, every misstep resonated across the empire. During a brief lull in the fighting, Alexios retired to a private chamber to review correspondence. Letters from governors in distant provinces arrived, some expressing loyalty, others hinting at concern over the rebellion's potential spread. The emperor understood that managing perception was as critical as commanding armies. Governors needed reassurance, soldiers needed clear orders, and citizens required a sense of stability. A failure to communicate effectively could destabilize regions far removed from the immediate conflict. As evening approached, Alexios walked once again through the palace gardens. The scent of night-blooming jasmine mingled with the faint smoke from torches, and the city seemed to exhale quietly. He reflected on the nature of leadership, the delicate balance of power, and the weight of responsibility. Even as victories were claimed, the rebellion's underlying threat persisted. Each decision, each action, carried consequences that could unfold far beyond the immediate moment. The life of an emperor, he realized, was not measured merely in years or battles, but in the constant vigilance and careful judgment required to maintain control over a vast, complex empire. Night fell, and the city settled into tense quiet. The Bosporus rebellion was far from resolved, but careful planning, disciplined execution, and timely diplomacy had begun to tilt the balance in favor of the empire. Yet Alexios knew better than to assume victory. Byzantium had endured centuries not through complacency, but through constant attention to strategy, loyalty, and the unpredictable currents of human ambition. As you listen, imagine the intensity of this delicate dance. The interplay of trust and suspicion, strategy and intuition, force and diplomacy. Picture Alexios in the candlelit chambers of the palace, weighing every decision with the knowledge that one misstep could ripple across provinces, destabilizing the empire itself. Stand beside him as he navigates a world where every whisper, glance, and rumor carries significance, where loyalty is precious, and where authority must be carefully maintained through constant vigilance. And remember, the rebellion is not yet over. New alliances, betrayals, and unforeseen events lie ahead, testing the emperor's skill and resolve. The life of Alexios, like that of Byzantium itself, is a continuous negotiation with power, ambition, and fate. A story of calculated risks, human complexity, and the fragile endurance of an empire on the edge of upheaval. The next morning brought a grim clarity to Constantinople. While the city stirred with the usual hum of merchants, laborers, and guards, Alexios' mind was fully occupied with the unfolding crisis in the Bosporus region. Reports from the front lines had grown increasingly alarming. Despite careful planning and strategic positioning, rebel forces had begun coordinating in unexpected ways, taking advantage of the region's rugged terrain to isolate loyalist units and disrupt supply lines. Even small villages, once considered reliable, were now sending mixed signals, some withholding information, others claiming allegiance while secretly supporting the rebellion. The emperor understood immediately that this phase of the conflict would be the most dangerous yet. Alexios convened an emergency council at dawn. The throne room, usually a place of ceremonial display, was transformed into a strategic command center. Maps were spread across long tables, scout sketches and reports pinned to the walls, and messengers moved in and out with updates. The tension was palpable. Advisors spoke in measured tones, aware that a single misjudgment could be catastrophic. "We are entering a critical phase," Alexios stated, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "The rebels are no longer merely reacting. They are planning, coordinating, and testing our responses. We must anticipate their moves while ensuring that loyalty within our own ranks remains unshaken." Demetrios, ever pragmatic, outlined a series of tactical options. "Sire, we can push forward aggressively to reclaim lost ground, but we risk significant casualties and potential civilian unrest. Alternatively, we can adopt a defensive posture, fortifying key positions and waiting for the rebels to overextend. Yet hesitation may embolden them further." Alexios studied the maps, tracing roads, hills, and river crossings with his finger. He understood that leadership required both decisiveness and flexibility. "We will combine both approaches," he decided. "Reinforce critical positions, secure supply lines, and allow no opportunity for the rebels to divide our forces. At the same time, deploy mobile units to harass and contain their movements, preventing them from consolidating strength. Every decision must protect the empire and its people." As plans were set in motion, news arrived of a particularly audacious rebel maneuver. A small, heavily armed detachment had attempted to infiltrate a strategic coastal town under the cover of night, seeking to cut off communication between loyalist forces. Alexios' brow furrowed. Such bold actions reflected not only desperation but strategic cunning. He immediately instructed Demetrios to send reinforcements and personally oversaw the coordination of defensive positions. The goal was not merely to repel the attack, but to demonstrate authority, resolve, and strategic mastery. In Byzantium, perception of power could be as decisive as actual military strength. During the late morning, a new layer of complexity emerged. A messenger arrived from a distant province, reporting that some governors had received promises of support from the rebel noble family. While no direct action had yet been taken, the message hinted at potential coordination that could expand the rebellion far beyond the Bosporus. Alexios' mind raced. He understood that in the delicate balance of empire, rumors and alliances were as powerful as swords. Swift, measured action was required to prevent the rebellion from metastasizing. Orders were drafted, letters dispatched, and envoys instructed to reinforce loyalty and clarify the consequences of betrayal. By mid-afternoon, skirmishes erupted along multiple fronts. Loyalist forces, disciplined yet stretched thin, faced determined rebel units employing guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and clever use of terrain. Reports flowed continuously to the palace. Alexios absorbed every detail, cross-referencing scout observations with messenger accounts, anticipating enemy maneuvers before they occurred. The emperor's mind was a web of strategy, constantly adjusting to new information, weighing risks, and balancing both human and material resources. Even as he monitored the battle, Alexios pondered the personal cost of leadership. Soldiers were being wounded and killed, villages were caught in the crossfire, and families faced uncertainty. The emperor's responsibility extended beyond military outcomes. It encompassed the lives, morale, and loyalty of an entire empire. He reflected on the lessons of history. Empires were rarely destroyed by armies alone, but by mismanagement of human nature, failure to inspire loyalty, and underestimation of ambition and fear. As evening approached, a surprising opportunity presented itself. One faction of the rebels, disillusioned by the brutality and unpredictability of their own leaders, offered to negotiate surrender. Alexios acted swiftly, sending a carefully selected envoy under strict secrecy. The surrender, if successful, would not only reduce the immediate threat, but also send a powerful message. Loyalty to the empire was rewarded, and rebellion carried risks even among conspirators. Byzantium had survived for centuries not merely through conquest, but through the nuanced application of power, diplomacy, and understanding human psychology. By nightfall, partial victories had been achieved, yet the rebellion's underlying danger persisted. The strategic coastal town was secure, defecting rebels were reintegrated, and supply lines were restored. Yet distant skirmishes, rogue factions, and the looming influence of the noble family reminded Alexios that the battle was far from over. Every victory had come at a cost, and every decision carried consequences that would unfold in days and weeks to come. Demetrios spoke first, outlining the day's reports. "Sire, the rebels have split their forces into small, mobile units, making direct confrontation challenging. Some towns that had pledged loyalty are wavering, and supplies are being seized along the coast. If left unchecked, these units may converge and overwhelm our positions." Alexios studied the maps with intense focus, his mind tracing troop movements, terrain, and supply lines. Leadership in Byzantium required more than directing armies. It demanded an understanding of psychology, human nature, and perception. He weighed the possibility of sending rapid response units to intercept the rebels against the need to maintain the stability of towns yet loyal to the empire. Every decision carried both immediate and long-term consequences. By mid-morning, a particularly troubling report arrived. A loyalist detachment stationed at a strategic hill had been overwhelmed. Casualties were significant, and the survivors had retreated to safer positions. Alexios' heart sank. Each life lost was not only a tragedy but also a potential blow to morale, both among soldiers and citizens. He immediately dispatched reinforcements and instructed envoys to reassure the affected population. Leadership, he knew, was as much about inspiring confidence as it was about strategy. As the morning wore on, additional intelligence revealed a disturbing pattern. Certain towns were quietly harboring rebel sympathizers. These subtle betrayals threatened to unravel months of careful planning. Alexios understood that controlling territory was meaningless if loyalty could not be secured. He ordered targeted inspections, careful inquiries, and the deployment of trusted officers to maintain order. Byzantium had survived centuries not merely through conquest but through the meticulous management of hearts and minds. By early afternoon, the first major confrontation of the day erupted near a narrow coastal pass. Rebel forces attempted to cut off a supply line critical to loyalist units, and loyal troops responded with disciplined formations, strategic ambushes, and coordinated maneuvers. From the palace, Alexios received continuous updates. Every skirmish, every movement, and every casualty mattered. The emperor's mind worked tirelessly, weighing options, anticipating enemy tactics, and calculating the potential ripple effects across the region. During a brief lull, Alexios received word from an envoy. A faction of rebels, fearing retribution from their own leaders, expressed willingness to surrender if granted safe passage. The opportunity was delicate but potentially decisive. Alexios acted swiftly, sending envoys under strict secrecy and ensuring that the offer of amnesty was communicated clearly. Successful integration of defectors would not only reduce immediate threats but also send a powerful message. Loyalty to the empire was rewarded, and rebellion carried real risks. As Alexios walked through the palace corridors, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows on the mosaics, he reflected on the nature of authority. Leadership was an unending river, flowing with challenges, threats, and responsibilities. Every whisper, every glance, every rumor had the potential to shift the balance of power. The life of an emperor was measured not only by victories but by the wisdom, foresight, and patience applied to each moment of decision. Imagine standing beside him in those candlelit halls, feeling the weight of an empire's survival pressing on every choice, every word, and every action. Picture the tension, the strategy, and the subtle interplay of human ambition and loyalty. The Bosporus Rebellion, though partially contained, remained a living, shifting threat, and Alexios' skill as both strategist and ruler would determine not only the outcome of this conflict, but the enduring stability of Byzantium itself. And remember, even amid victories and clever maneuvers, the shadows of uncertainty remain. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, unforeseen betrayals, and perhaps unexpected alliances. The story of an emperor is a continuous negotiation with power, fate, and the unpredictable nature of human ambition. The following morning brought a weight heavier than any Alexios had felt since ascending the throne. While Constantinople awoke with the usual bustle, the clanging of merchants' carts, the calls of street vendors, and the distant ringing of church bells, the emperor's mind was consumed entirely by the escalating situation in the Bosporus region. Overnight, reports indicated that the rebels, undeterred by recent setbacks, had launched coordinated attacks on multiple small towns along the coast. Supply caravans had been intercepted, and isolated loyalist units faced ambushes in narrow passes. The rebellion, once considered containable, now threatened to spiral beyond immediate control. Alexios convened an urgent council in the palace's war chamber. The walls, adorned with mosaics of previous emperors, seemed to echo the gravity of his task. Advisors, generals, and trusted scribes gathered, each bringing new intelligence and strategic options. "We are entering a critical juncture," Alexios began, his tone calm yet carrying undeniable authority. The rebels are demonstrating coordination and cunning. Delay is no longer acceptable, yet rash action may cost lives unnecessarily. Every choice must reflect both strength and prudence. Yet even amid these strategic maneuvers, a shadow fell across Alexios' personal life. Reports came of his distant cousin, a nobleman in one of the northern provinces, secretly supporting the rebellion. The realization struck him sharply. Betrayal could come not only from soldiers and governors, but from those closest to him. He pondered the delicate balance between familial ties, loyalty, and the responsibilities of an emperor. A misstep could cost both personal relationships and the empire's stability. As evening approached, skirmishes continued. Some rebel units surrendered quietly, persuaded by envoys, while others resisted fiercely, testing the discipline of loyalist troops. The coastal towns were increasingly secure, but the interior hills remained contested, with rebels using ambushes and traps to delay the advance. Alexios monitored every report, issuing orders and adjusting strategies. Leadership demanded relentless attention, and even the smallest oversight could allow rebellion to spread. Night fell, and the city of Constantinople settled into a tense quiet. Alexios, alone in his private chambers, reflected on the day's events. Every victory had come at a cost, and every decision carried consequences that would unfold in unpredictable ways. The Bosporus rebellion, though partially contained, remained a living threat, challenging both the strategic skill and moral judgment of the emperor. As you picture this scene, imagine the tension, the careful calculations, and the relentless pressure of leadership. Stand beside Alexios as he navigates the complexities of loyalty, strategy, and human ambition. Feel the weight of responsibility pressing on every decision, every command, and every word. The life of an emperor is unending vigilance, balancing mercy and authority, perception and power, in a world where every choice can shape the fate of an entire empire. And remember, even as night falls, the story is far from over. Tomorrow will bring new battles, unforeseen betrayals, and difficult choices that will test the resolve and wisdom of Alexios like never before. The path of an emperor is a continuous negotiation with power, human nature, and the fragile endurance of an empire on the edge of upheaval. The following dawn cast a pale, uneasy light over Constantinople. The city moved with its usual rhythm, merchants setting up stalls, the clatter of hooves on stone streets, church bells ringing in distant neighborhoods. But Alexios' mind was fully consumed by the developments in the Bosporus region. Overnight, reports had come in of a major rebel maneuver. Several groups had converged on a strategic coastal town, attempting to cut the road linking it to the main loyalist forces. The scale and coordination of this assault suggested not desperation, but carefully planned audacity. For the first time, Alexios felt the true weight of the rebellion pressing against the empire. He called an immediate council in the palace's war chamber. The walls, adorned with intricate mosaics of past emperors and battles, seemed to absorb the tension of the room. Advisors, generals, and trusted scribes gathered, each bringing intelligence that was fragmentary, yet vital. "This is no longer a simple insurrection," Alexios began, his tone calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "They are organized, they are bold, and they seek to test both our military and psychological strength. Delay is a risk, but reckless aggression could cost too many lives. We must act with precision and purpose." Demetrios, always pragmatic, outlined the options. "Sire, the rebels are attempting to encircle the town. A direct assault could result in heavy casualties. However, if we wait for reinforcements, they may consolidate their position further. We risk losing both the town and the morale of our troops." Alexios studied the maps, tracing the coastal roads and river crossings with a careful finger. Leadership in Byzantium required far more than directing troops. It demanded an understanding of human nature, perception, and the delicate balance of power. He considered the psychological state of his soldiers, the loyalty of governors, and the potential reactions of the civilian population. Every choice carried consequences beyond immediate military outcomes. By mid-morning, Skirmishes escalated along the town's perimeter. Loyalist forces, disciplined yet fatigued, faced rebels employing ambushes and intricate knowledge of the terrain. Scouts relayed information constantly, and messengers brought detailed updates to the palace. Alexios absorbed every report, adjusting strategies in real time. He knew that the difference between victory and disaster often lay in subtle decisions made far from the battlefield itself. The following dawn cast a pale, uneasy light over Constantinople. The city moved with its usual rhythm, merchants setting up stalls, the clatter of hooves on stone streets, church bells ringing in distant neighborhoods. But Alexios' mind was fully consumed by the developments in the Bosporus region. Overnight, reports had come in of a major rebel maneuver. Several groups had converged on a strategic coastal town, attempting to cut the road linking it to the main loyalist forces. The scale and coordination of this assault suggested not desperation, but carefully planned audacity. For the first time, Alexios felt the true weight of the rebellion pressing against the empire. He called an immediate council in the palace's war chamber. The walls, adorned with intricate mosaics of past emperors and battles, seemed to absorb the tension of the room. Advisors, generals, and trusted scribes gathered, each bringing intelligence that was fragmentary, yet vital. "This is no longer a simple insurrection," Alexios began, his tone calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "They are organized, they are bold, and they seek to test both our military and psychological strength. Delay is a risk, but reckless aggression could cost too many lives. We must act with precision and purpose." Demetrios, always pragmatic, outlined the options. "Sire, the rebels are attempting to encircle the town. A direct assault could result in heavy casualties. However, if we wait for reinforcements, they may consolidate their position further. We risk losing both the town and the morale of our troops." Alexios studied the maps, tracing the coastal roads and river crossings with a careful finger. Leadership in Byzantium required far more than directing troops. It demanded an understanding of human nature, perception, and the delicate balance of power. He considered the psychological state of his soldiers, the loyalty of governors, and the potential reactions of the civilian population. Every choice carried consequences beyond immediate military outcomes. By mid-morning, skirmishes escalated along the town's perimeter. Loyalist forces, disciplined yet fatigued, faced rebels employing ambushes and intricate knowledge of the terrain. Scouts relayed information constantly, and messengers brought detailed updates to the palace. Alexios absorbed every report, adjusting strategies in real time. He knew that the difference between victory and disaster often lay in subtle decisions made far from the battlefield itself. During the height of the fighting, a critical report arrived. A loyalist commander had been mortally wounded in an ambush, leaving his unit vulnerable. Alexios' heart tightened. The loss was not only strategic but personal. Each life lost under his command weighed on him deeply. He immediately ordered reinforcements to secure the position and dispatched envoys to reassure the troops. Leadership, he knew, was measured not merely in victories, but in how one responds to setbacks, protects those under one's command, and maintains cohesion amidst chaos. Meanwhile, unexpected intelligence reached Alexios from a former ally of the rebel noble family. The messenger claimed that several mid-ranking rebel leaders were increasingly fearful of their superiors' ambitions and might be persuaded to defect. Alexios recognized the opportunity but understood the inherent risk. Even the most well-intentioned defection could be a trap. He cross-referenced the intelligence with scouts' observations and issued precise instructions to carefully test the rebels' willingness to surrender without exposing loyalist troops to danger. By late afternoon, the first major shifts occurred. Some rebel units, swayed by envoys and threats of isolation, began withdrawing from strategic positions. Others, however, refused to yield, forcing brutal engagements in narrow passes and coastal roads. The casualties were mounting, and the human cost of the rebellion became painfully visible. Villages were damaged, families displaced, and soldiers exhausted. Alexios watched the reports closely, issuing orders that balanced decisive action with the preservation of life. He understood that an emperor's duty extended beyond commanding armies. It encompassed the well-being, loyalty, and morale of all those within the empire. As evening approached, a new crisis emerged. The coastal town under siege had partially fallen, and rebels had occupied key sections. The sight of loyalist soldiers retreating sent shockwaves through the remaining units, threatening to undermine morale further. Alexios acted swiftly, coordinating a counterattack using carefully timed reinforcements and mobile units trained for rapid engagement. The counteroffensive was dangerous but necessary. Hesitation could embolden the rebels and encourage further defection among wavering towns. Nightfall brought both relief and continued tension. The counterattack had partially restored the town, and several rebels had surrendered, though the cost in lives was steep. The Bosporus rebellion remained a persistent and unpredictable threat. In the palace, Alexios reflected on the day's events. Every decision carried consequences that would ripple across the empire. Tactical choices affected morale, diplomacy influenced loyalty, and human emotion could alter the outcomes of carefully laid plans. Leadership, he realized, was a continuous exercise in anticipation, judgment, and the careful management of both power and perception. Imagine standing beside him in those candlelit halls, absorbing reports, weighing strategies, and feeling the weight of the empire pressing on every thought. Picture the intensity, the tension, and the intricate interplay of human ambition, loyalty, and fear. The life of an emperor was unending vigilance, a constant negotiation between authority and mercy, perception and reality, power and responsibility. And remember, this is only one chapter in a long, unfolding struggle. Tomorrow will bring new battles, unforeseen betrayals, and difficult choices that will test the wisdom and courage of Alexios more deeply than ever. The story of an emperor is not defined by a single victory or defeat, but by the relentless navigation of challenges, both seen and hidden, in a world where the fate of an entire empire hangs in delicate balance. The night after the partial reclamation of the coastal town was restless, not only for the city of Constantinople but for Alexios himself. Even in the quiet hours, the palace seemed to hum with latent tension, the faint rustle of servants, the distant clang of sentries' armor, and the soft murmurs of advisors preparing reports. The Bosporus rebellion, though partially contained, had revealed the depths of its cunning, and the cost of hesitation or miscalculation became painfully clear. Alexios understood that each day, each decision, rippled far beyond the immediate battlefield, affecting loyalty, morale, and the delicate perception of power across the empire. At dawn, reports arrived of new skirmishes in the interior hills. Rebel forces, regrouping after recent defeats, had launched coordinated strikes on smaller towns and isolated loyalist units. Their mobility, knowledge of the terrain, and willingness to exploit weaknesses posed a persistent challenge. Alexios convened an urgent council, the throne room alive with the low murmur of advisors, scribes, and generals. The rebels are learning, adapting, and testing every aspect of our control. He began, his voice steady but firm. We must anticipate their maneuvers, safeguard our supply lines, and maintain the morale of both troops and citizens. This rebellion is not merely a military challenge. It is a test of our authority and strategic foresight. Demetrios, his face lined with concern, outlined the immediate threats. Sire, several towns have begun sending conflicting reports of loyalty. Supply lines have been disrupted, and the rebels are employing ambushes along narrow roads. If we act without careful coordination, we risk both lives and further erosion of confidence among our forces. Alexios studied the maps, tracing roads, rivers, and hills with meticulous care. Leadership in Byzantium required not only military acumen but also insight into human behavior. Soldiers' morale, civilians' perceptions, and the subtle ambitions of local governors were as consequential as the enemy's actions. Every command carried consequences far beyond the immediate tactical outcomes. By mid-morning, intelligence revealed an alarming development. A mid-ranking noble, previously considered loyal, had been secretly communicating with the rebels. This revelation struck Alexios sharply. Betrayal could emerge not only from distant provinces but from within the very ranks of those entrusted with power. He immediately dispatched trusted officers to investigate, ensuring that any action balanced firmness with caution. Premature confrontation could alienate allies and trigger unintended consequences, yet inaction risked allowing treachery to fester. Meanwhile, reports indicated that several rebel leaders were showing signs of internal dissent. Fearful of retribution from their own noble patrons and frustrated by slow gains, some expressed a willingness to negotiate surrender. Alexios recognized the opportunity but approached it with calculated prudence. Envoys were dispatched discreetly, ensuring that negotiations did not reveal weaknesses to other factions. Byzantium had survived centuries not merely through conquest but through diplomacy, perception, and the careful management of human ambition. By afternoon, the first major engagement unfolded in the interior hills. Rebel units attempted to ambush a supply caravan critical to the Loyalist position. Loyalist forces, forewarned by scouts, prepared defensive positions and countermeasures. The clash was intense. Narrow passes amplified the danger, ambushes created chaos, and every maneuver demanded precision. Reports flowed continuously to the palace. Alexios absorbed each one, issuing adjustments, redirecting units, and ensuring that every move preserved both strategic advantage and the lives of soldiers wherever possible. During a brief lull, Alexios reflected on the personal cost of leadership. Soldiers were wounded, towns disrupted, and families displaced. The weight of command extended beyond the battlefield. It encompassed every life influenced by the empire's stability. He understood that an emperor's success was measured not only in victories but in the judicious exercise of power, the protection of loyalty, and the management of perception across the empire. Evening brought new intelligence. Several towns had quietly offered to provide information on rebel movements, motivated either by loyalty or fear. Alexios saw an opportunity to consolidate control without further bloodshed. He dispatched envoys and small mobile units to verify intelligence, careful to ensure that actions did not provoke suspicion or rebellion among towns whose loyalty was fragile. Byzantium thrived on subtlety as much as force. Perception of authority was a weapon as powerful as any sword. By nightfall, partial victories had been achieved, yet the rebellion's threat remained acute. Several rebel units had withdrawn or surrendered, but others continued to maneuver in unpredictable patterns, exploiting terrain, gaps in communication, and wavering loyalties. The city of Constantinople itself remained tense. Merchants, citizens, and officials were aware, consciously or unconsciously, that the stability of the empire was being tested. In the quiet hours, Alexios reviewed every report, map, and letter. Each decision carried ramifications far beyond the immediate moment. The rebellion was a living entity, adapting and learning, requiring constant vigilance, foresight, and subtlety. Leadership was an unending negotiation with reality, perception, and human ambition. The life of an emperor was never simple. It was a river of responsibility, flowing unceasingly, demanding continuous attention, and allowing little respite. Imagine standing beside him in the candlelit corridors of the palace, listening to reports, weighing strategy, and feeling the constant pressure of an empire's survival pressing on every choice. Picture the tension, the subtle interplay of loyalty, fear, and ambition, and the relentless vigilance required to maintain authority. Each decision could inspire confidence or sow doubt, secure territory or provoke further rebellion, reward loyalty or inadvertently encourage treachery. And remember, the rebellion is far from over. New battles, betrayals, and unexpected developments lie ahead. Tomorrow will bring fresh challenges that will test Alexios' strategic skill, moral judgment, and psychological insight more than any day before. The story of an emperor is not defined by one victory or defeat, but by the unending navigation of power, perception, and the fragile endurance of an empire on the edge of upheaval. The dawn arrived over Constantinople like a thin veil of smoke, casting a muted light on the city that seemed almost reflective of the tension gripping the empire. While citizens went about their routines, the palace was alive with a different kind of energy. The ceaseless murmur of messengers, the rustling of parchments, and the steady footsteps of guards carrying urgent reports. The Bosporus rebellion had evolved beyond a simple uprising. It had become a test of both the emperor's resolve and the resilience of his entire command structure. Alexios knew that every miscalculation, every delay, could lead to cascading consequences far beyond the immediate battlefield. He convened the morning council with a palpable sense of urgency. The throne room, usually a place of ceremonial grandeur, felt tight and suffocating under the weight of looming decisions. Generals and advisors leaned over maps, scribes recorded every detail, and messengers arrived with the latest intelligence. The rebels are more coordinated than ever. Alexios began, his voice calm but imbued with authority. Their aim is clear: to test the limits of our control, to probe for weaknesses, and to exploit them. Today we act decisively but with care. Every move must protect our people and preserve the perception of strength. Demetrios, visibly tense, outlined the latest reports. Sire, several coastal towns have been cut off from reinforcements. Supply lines are disrupted in the hills, and a loyalist detachment has suffered heavy losses in an ambush. Rebels are increasingly bold, coordinating attacks and attempting to outmaneuver our forces. Immediate action is required to prevent further escalation. Alexios traced the routes on the maps, noting choke points, rivers, and hills where ambushes were most likely. Leadership in Byzantium demanded more than tactical brilliance. It required anticipation, psychology, and the delicate management of loyalty and perception. Soldiers' morale, civilians' confidence, and the subtle ambitions of local governors were all part of the intricate calculus. A wrong decision in any of these areas could unravel the empire's stability. By mid-morning, the first major confrontations erupted. Rebel forces, having anticipated some of the loyalist movements, attempted to encircle a strategically vital town along the coast. Loyalist troops, forewarned by scouts, established defensive positions and counter-ambushes. The fighting was brutal. Narrow passes amplified the intensity, and small mistakes could be deadly. Reports flowed incessantly to the palace, and Alexios, absorbing each, issued precise commands to adjust troop deployments, fortify vulnerable positions, and secure supply lines. Amid the chaos, Alexios received word of an unexpected betrayal. A trusted commander in the northern hills had secretly communicated with the rebels, providing intelligence that enabled some of the ambushes. The news struck him sharply, a reminder that treachery could come not only from distant provinces but from those closest to power. He immediately dispatched loyal officers to investigate and contain the threat while simultaneously reassuring loyal troops that discipline and loyalty would be rewarded. Leadership in Byzantium required balancing the harshness of justice with the subtlety of perception. Despite the grim news, opportunities presented themselves. Several mid-ranking rebel leaders, fearful of retribution from their superiors and frustrated by slow progress, expressed willingness to negotiate surrender. Alexios recognized the delicate balance. Accepting defections could weaken the rebellion without further bloodshed, but missteps might alert other factions to the possibility of leniency and encourage subterfuge. Envoys were sent with carefully crafted instructions, ensuring that communications remained discreet and credible. Byzantium had survived centuries through diplomacy, perception, and careful manipulation of human ambition, and this was a moment to apply all three. By afternoon, the rebellion escalated further. Loyalist forces faced ambushes along multiple fronts, and the casualties among soldiers began to mount. Villages were caught in crossfire, civilians displaced, and supplies disrupted. Alexios absorbed every report, issuing orders that balanced strategic necessity with the preservation of life. The emperor understood that leadership was not only about victories, but about how one responds to setbacks, maintains morale, and projects authority. Evening brought a critical moment. One of the coastal towns under siege had partially fallen, and loyalist forces were forced to retreat under pressure. The psychological impact on surrounding regions was profound. Towns that had remained neutral or loyal began to question the strength of imperial authority. Alexios responded immediately, coordinating a counteroffensive using mobile units and reinforcements. Every movement was calculated, every action measured to restore confidence while minimizing further casualties. In Byzantium, perception was as crucial as force. The appearance of strength could prevent wider rebellion. Amid the chaos, Alexios received word of an unexpected betrayal. A trusted commander in the northern hills had secretly communicated with the rebels, providing intelligence that enabled some of the ambushes. The news struck him sharply, a reminder that treachery could come not only from distant provinces but from those closest to power. He immediately dispatched loyal officers to investigate and contain the threat while simultaneously reassuring loyal troops that discipline and loyalty would be rewarded. Leadership in Byzantium required balancing the harshness of justice with the subtlety of perception. Despite the grim news, opportunities presented themselves. Several mid-ranking rebel leaders, fearful of retribution from their superiors and frustrated by slow progress, expressed willingness to negotiate surrender. Alexios recognized the delicate balance. Accepting defections could weaken the rebellion without further bloodshed, but missteps might alert other factions to the possibility of leniency and encourage subterfuge. Envoys were sent with carefully crafted instructions, ensuring that communications remained discreet and credible. Byzantium had survived centuries through diplomacy, perception, and careful manipulation of human ambition, and this was a moment to apply all three. By afternoon, the rebellion escalated further. Loyalist forces faced ambushes along multiple fronts, and the casualties among soldiers began to mount. Villages were caught in crossfire, civilians displaced, and supplies disrupted. Alexios absorbed every report, issuing orders that balanced strategic necessity with the preservation of life. The emperor understood that leadership was not only about victories, but about how one responds to setbacks, maintains morale, and projects authority. Evening brought a critical moment. One of the coastal towns under siege had partially fallen, and loyalist forces were forced to retreat under pressure. The psychological impact on surrounding regions was profound. Towns that had remained neutral or loyal began to question the strength of imperial authority. Alexios responded immediately, coordinating a counteroffensive using mobile units and reinforcements. Every movement was calculated, every action measured to restore confidence while minimizing further casualties. In Byzantium, perception was as crucial as force. The appearance of strength could prevent wider rebellion. As night fell, Alexios retreated to his private chambers. Candlelight flickered across maps and letters, casting long shadows that mirrored the complexity of the situation. He reflected on the human cost of leadership: the soldiers who had fallen, the civilians caught in conflict, the allies whose loyalty wavered, and the traitors who threatened stability from within. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him like never before. The life of an emperor was unending vigilance, a continuous negotiation with power, loyalty, and human ambition. Every choice carried consequences, immediate and far-reaching, visible and hidden. Imagine standing beside him in those quiet, candlelit halls, listening to reports, weighing strategies, and feeling the constant pressure of responsibility. Picture the subtle interplay of loyalty, fear, and ambition, and the relentless vigilance required to maintain authority. Each decision could inspire confidence or sow doubt, strengthen the empire or provoke further rebellion. And remember, the rebellion is far from over. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, unforeseen betrayals, and critical choices that will test Alexios' wisdom, patience, and courage. The story of an emperor is not defined by a single victory or defeat, but by the continuous navigation of power, perception, and the fragile endurance of an empire teetering on the edge of upheaval. The morning broke over Constantinople with an eerie calm, the kind of silence that always precedes upheaval. While the city stirred with its usual bustle, the merchants setting up their stalls, the clang of hammers in workshops, the soft tolling of distant church bells, Alexios' mind was fully consumed by the rebellion now spreading across the Bosporus region. Overnight, reports had arrived that rebel forces had launched a coordinated strike against a strategic inland town, one that acted as a critical hub for communication and supplies. The audacity of this maneuver was unlike anything the loyalist commanders had faced. and it sent a shiver of concern through even the most seasoned advisors. Alexios summoned an emergency council. The throne room, normally a place of grandeur and ceremony, seemed suffocating under the weight of tension. Generals and advisors leaned over maps, scribes recorded every detail, and messengers arrived breathless with updates. "The rebels are no longer merely testing our strength," Alexios said, his voice calm but resonant with authority. "They are coordinating, adapting, and exploiting every weakness they perceive. Today, every decision we make will determine not only the survival of this town, but the morale of loyalist forces across the region." Demetrios, visibly tense, laid out the latest intelligence. "Sire, the rebels have surrounded the town from 3 sides. Loyalist reinforcements are delayed due to ambushes along the coastal roads. If we fail to act decisively, the town could fall completely, and its capture may embolden other factions to rise in rebellion. Casualties among our troops are mounting, and supplies are critical." Alexios studied the maps intently, tracing paths through forests, hills, and river crossings. Leadership in Byzantium demanded more than strategy. It required understanding human behavior, anticipating betrayal, and managing perception as much as reality. Each decision carried consequences not just for the battlefield but for the loyalty of governors, soldiers, and civilians alike. Hesitation could erode confidence, yet rash action could result in unnecessary loss of life. By mid-morning, Loyalist forces engaged the rebels outside the town. The terrain amplified the danger. Narrow passes allowed ambushes, cliffs created deadly choke points, and every misstep could be fatal. Reports streamed continuously to the palace. Alexios absorbed every detail, issuing calculated orders to redirect troops, fortify weak positions, and coordinate reinforcements. Every command was precise. Every adjustment mattered. The emperor understood that in Byzantium, perception could be as decisive as force. A single defeat, even if minor, could ripple across the empire, encouraging dissent and rebellion. During the heat of battle, another report arrived, more troubling than the first. A high-ranking noble in a nearby province had secretly aligned with the rebels, providing intelligence that enabled some of the recent ambushes. Alexios felt a deep sting. Not only had betrayal come from within, but it had direct consequences on the battlefield. He acted immediately, dispatching loyal officers to contain the threat while reinforcing the morale of troops and towns still loyal. Leadership in Byzantium required balancing firmness with prudence, ensuring that justice did not alienate allies while protecting the empire from treachery. Amid these crises, an unexpected development emerged. Some mid-ranking rebel leaders, frustrated by their superiors' ambition and fearful of reprisals, expressed willingness to surrender if granted protection. Alexios recognized a delicate opportunity. Integrating these defectors could weaken the rebellion significantly, but mismanagement might alert other factions and encourage further treachery. Envoys were sent with carefully crafted instructions, ensuring that the surrender process was credible, discreet, and strategically advantageous. Byzantium's longevity had always depended on the delicate management of perception, diplomacy, and force, and this was a moment to apply all 3. By afternoon, the intensity escalated further. Loyalist troops faced repeated ambushes, and the toll on human life became starkly visible. Villages were damaged, families displaced, and soldiers exhausted. Alexios monitored the situation relentlessly, issuing orders that balanced decisive action with preservation of life wherever possible. His thoughts returned repeatedly to the human dimension. Every casualty, every betrayal, every fearful glance among soldiers could affect the outcome as much as any tactical maneuver. Leadership was as much about managing hearts and minds as it was about deploying troops. Evening arrived, but the day's challenges were far from over. The coastal town remained partially under siege, and loyalist forces struggled to maintain cohesion under pressure. The psychological impact on surrounding areas was profound. Towns that had remained loyal began to question the emperor's strength, and whispers of rebellion grew louder in distant provinces. Alexios coordinated a counterattack, using mobile units to harass and contain rebel forces while ensuring that supply lines remained intact. Each maneuver required precision, timing, and constant vigilance. In Byzantium, authority depended as much on subtlety and foresight as on brute strength. As night fell, Alexios withdrew to his private chambers, candlelight flickering across the maps and letters scattered before him. He reflected on the day's events, the soldiers who had fallen, the towns disrupted, the allies whose loyalty wavered, and the traitors who threatened the empire from within. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him like a physical force. The life of an emperor was unending vigilance, a continuous negotiation with human ambition, perception, and the fragile endurance of the empire itself. Picture standing beside him in those candlelit halls, listening to reports, weighing strategy, and feeling the immense pressure of leadership. Imagine the interplay of loyalty, fear, and ambition, and the constant vigilance required to maintain authority. Each decision could inspire confidence or sow doubt, strengthen the empire or provoke further rebellion, and reward loyalty or inadvertently encourage treachery. And remember, the rebellion is far from over. New battles, betrayals, and unexpected developments lie ahead. Tomorrow will bring fresh challenges that will test Alexios' strategic skill, moral judgment, and psychological insight more than any day before. The story of an emperor is not defined by one victory or defeat, but by the continuous navigation of power, perception, and the delicate endurance of an empire on the edge of upheaval. The morning air over Constantinople was crisp but heavy with tension, as though the city itself sensed the turbulence spreading from the Bosporus region. While citizens carried on with daily routines, merchants calling out their wares and the distant clang of blacksmiths' hammers filling the streets, Alexios' mind was entirely consumed by the rebellion. Reports had come in overnight that several rebel factions, regrouping after earlier setbacks, had coordinated simultaneous attacks on towns that had until recently remained loyal. The scale of the assaults revealed not desperation, but meticulous planning and audacity, signaling that the rebellion had evolved into something far more dangerous than mere localized skirmishes. Alexios convened an urgent morning council, his face grave as he addressed generals, advisors, and scribes. The throne room, usually a symbol of ceremonial grandeur, seemed charged with anxiety and the hum of unspoken fear. "We are no longer facing scattered rebels," Alexios began, his voice calm yet commanding, "but a network of determined and coordinated forces. Today, every decision we make will not only determine the survival of towns and armies, but the very perception of our authority across the empire. Delay or miscalculation will be fatal." Demetrios, standing stiffly by his side, outlined the immediate threats. "Sire, the rebels have targeted 3 towns simultaneously, cutting off key roads and threatening supply lines. Loyalist reinforcements are delayed, and isolated units are at risk of annihilation. If we do not act decisively, the rebellion may gain momentum that could spread to provinces previously considered secure." Alexios traced routes across the maps, noting forests, hills, and rivers that could be used either as defensive advantages or as traps for his forces. Leadership in Byzantium required far more than strategy. It demanded anticipation, psychological insight, and careful management of perception. The loyalty of soldiers, the confidence of governors, and the subtle ambitions of local nobles were all factors as critical as enemy movements. Every choice carried consequences not just for immediate outcomes but for the empire's long-term stability. By late morning, loyalist forces engaged the rebels near one of the threatened towns. The terrain favored ambushes. Narrow passes, rocky cliffs, and dense forests turned each movement into a potential hazard. Casualties were mounting, and reports poured in with increasing urgency. Alexios issued calculated orders to redirect troops, secure supply lines, and fortify vulnerable positions, understanding that perception of strength could be as decisive as actual military advantage. A faltering defense could embolden other factions and encourage treachery. Then the most painful news arrived. A trusted ally and longtime commander, one who had fought beside Alexios in previous campaigns, had fallen in an ambush. The loss struck deeply, a personal wound as well as a strategic blow. Loyalist units faltered in the aftermath, and morale teetered dangerously. Alexios, though composed, felt the weight of responsibility keenly. The lives of every soldier, civilian, and governor in the empire were bound to the decisions he made, and every misjudgment could have cascading consequences. Amid this turmoil, new intelligence suggested that some mid-ranking rebel leaders were increasingly disillusioned with their superiors. Fearful of reprisals and frustrated by the slow pace of their campaign, they were reportedly willing to defect if granted protection. Alexios recognized the opportunity, yet he understood the risk. Even seemingly sincere defections could be traps. Envoys were dispatched discreetly, with precise instructions to test loyalty and credibility without revealing vulnerabilities to other rebel factions. Byzantium's endurance had always relied on the careful balance of diplomacy, perception, and military force, and this moment required all three. By afternoon, the fighting intensified. Loyalist troops faced repeated ambushes, and civilian populations were caught in the crossfire. Villages were damaged, supplies disrupted, and soldiers exhausted. Alexios monitored every report, issuing orders that balanced strategic necessity with preservation of life wherever possible. He knew that leadership was as much about managing human fear, loyalty, and morale as it was about military victories. Each casualty and every act of bravery reverberated far beyond the immediate battlefield, influencing the perception of imperial authority across the region. Evening brought a critical turning point. One of the towns under siege partially fell, forcing loyalist troops to withdraw. The psychological impact on neighboring areas was immediate. Towns that had remained loyal began to question the emperor's strength, and whispers of rebellion spread. Alexios orchestrated a counteroffensive, deploying mobile units to harass retreating rebels and stabilize the town. Every maneuver required meticulous timing, precise communication, and relentless attention to detail. In Byzantium, the perception of authority often held equal power to force itself. As night settled over the city, Alexios retreated to his private chambers. Candlelight flickered across maps, letters, and military reports, casting shadows that seemed to mirror the complex and fragile nature of the empire. He reflected on the day's events, the lives lost, towns endangered, the wavering loyalty of allies, and the treacheries that threatened stability from within. The weight of command pressed upon him like a physical burden. Leadership was relentless, demanding continuous vigilance, foresight, and careful judgment. Imagine standing beside him in those quiet halls, absorbing reports, weighing strategy, and feeling the immense pressure of an empire's survival pressing on every thought. Picture the intricate interplay of loyalty, fear, and ambition, and the constant vigilance required to maintain authority. Every decision could inspire confidence or sow doubt, strengthen the empire or provoke further rebellion, reward loyalty or inadvertently encourage treachery. And remember, the rebellion is far from over. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, unforeseen betrayals, and critical decisions that will test Alexios' wisdom, courage, and endurance more than any day before. The story of an emperor is not defined by a single battle or victory, but by the relentless negotiation with power, perception, and the fragile endurance of an empire teetering on the edge of upheaval. The morning arrived over Constantinople with a heavy, uneasy light, the city appearing almost still as if holding its breath. Beneath the usual clamor of merchants and craftsmen, the palace pulsed with urgent energy. Messengers arriving breathless, scribes feverishly recording reports, and generals pacing with grim determination. The Bosporus rebellion had escalated to a level that threatened not only towns and armies, but the very perception of the emperor's authority. Alexios understood that each decision today could shape the fate of the empire for years to come. He convened an emergency council at the earliest hour. The throne room, with its mosaics depicting past emperors and great battles, now seemed charged with a tense urgency. Advisors, generals, and scribes gathered around tables covered with maps, letters, and tactical reports. The rebels are no longer reacting, they are orchestrating. Alexios began, his voice calm but edged with resolve. They strike where we least expect, exploit our vulnerabilities, and challenge not only our military but our authority itself. Today, our actions must be precise, swift, and decisive. Demetrios, his expression grim, presented the latest intelligence. "Sire, multiple towns along the coast and interior are simultaneously threatened. Loyalist reinforcements are delayed, supply lines disrupted, and some units report heavy casualties from ambushes. If we fail to act decisively, this could embolden other factions to rise, and the rebellion may spread beyond containment." Alexios studied the maps intently, tracing every road, hill, and river crossing. Leadership in Byzantium demanded more than strategy. It required anticipation, psychology, and the management of perception. The morale of soldiers, the confidence of governors, and the subtle ambitions of local nobles were all critical factors, each as consequential as enemy movements. A single misstep could unravel months of preparation. By mid-morning, the first major battles erupted. Rebel forces, taking advantage of narrow passes and dense forests, ambushed loyalist troops moving toward threatened towns. Casualties mounted quickly, and the chaos of the terrain made command and control exceedingly difficult. Reports streamed continuously to the palace. Alexios absorbed each one, issuing precise orders to redirect troops, fortify vulnerable positions, and coordinate reinforcements. He understood that perception could be as decisive as force. A faltering defense could embolden other factions, while decisive, well-timed maneuvers could stabilize the region and maintain loyalty. Then, the most painful news arrived. A trusted advisor, one who had been a close companion since Alexios' youth, had been killed in the fighting. The loss struck not only as a strategic blow but also as a personal grief. Loyalist units faltered under the weight of the news, and morale dipped dangerously. Alexios, though composed, felt the sting of responsibility. The lives of soldiers and civilians alike were bound to the decisions he made, and every casualty carried a psychological weight that extended far beyond the battlefield. Amid the chaos, new intelligence revealed further treachery. A provincial governor, previously considered loyal, had been covertly supplying rebels with provisions and intelligence. This revelation threatened to unravel weeks of effort, and Alexios acted immediately, sending trusted officers to secure the governor's holdings, prevent further betrayal, and reassure the local population. Leadership required balancing justice and perception, ensuring that punishment did not alienate loyal allies while safeguarding the empire from further subversion. Meanwhile, whispers reached Alexios that several mid-ranking rebel leaders were contemplating defection, frustrated by their superiors' ambitions and fearful of reprisal. Alexios recognized the opportunity but approached it with extreme caution. Envoys were sent under strict secrecy, instructed to carefully test sincerity and ensure that any defections would not endanger loyalist troops. Byzantium's survival had always depended as much on diplomacy, perception, and cunning as on military force, and today was no exception. By afternoon, the battles intensified. Loyalist troops were pushed to their limits, facing relentless attacks, treacherous terrain, and the constant threat of ambush. Villages were damaged, families displaced, and supply lines further disrupted. Alexios monitored the situation with unwavering focus, issuing orders that balanced military necessity with the preservation of life wherever possible. Leadership was as much about maintaining loyalty, morale, and confidence as it was about tactical brilliance. As evening fell, a critical turning point emerged. One of the key towns under siege had partially fallen to rebels, forcing loyalist forces to retreat under pressure. The psychological impact on surrounding regions was immediate. Towns that had remained neutral or loyal now began to question the strength and stability of the emperor's authority. Alexios orchestrated a counteroffensive, deploying mobile units to harass retreating rebels, stabilize the town, and restore confidence. Every maneuver required precision, timing, and relentless attention to detail. In Byzantium, the appearance of authority often wielded as much power as force itself. Night arrived, but the emperor's vigilance did not wane. In his private chambers, candlelight flickered across maps, letters, and reports, casting shadows that seemed to mirror the fragility of the empire. He reflected on the day's losses, the soldiers fallen in battle, towns endangered, allies whose loyalty wavered, and traitors within. The weight of command pressed upon him with relentless force. The life of an emperor demanded unending vigilance, constant negotiation with power, perception, and human ambition. Picture standing beside him in those quiet, candlelit halls, listening to reports, weighing strategies, and feeling the immense pressure of responsibility. Every decision, every order, could inspire confidence or sow doubt, stabilize the empire or provoke further rebellion. And remember, the rebellion is far from over. Tomorrow will bring new crises, betrayals, and challenges that will test Alexios' strategic skill, moral judgment, and emotional endurance more than any day before. The story of an emperor is defined not by a single victory, but by the relentless navigation of power, perception, and the delicate endurance of an empire teetering on the edge of upheaval. The morning arrived over Constantinople with an almost unnatural stillness, as if the city itself were holding its breath in anticipation of the day's trials. While the markets opened with their familiar clamor, the distant tolling of church bells echoing across the streets, the palace hummed with tension. Messengers arrived breathless with reports, scribes scurried to record every detail, and generals prepared for the next wave of the rebellion. Alexios, already weary from days without rest, understood that every decision today could tip the balance between order and chaos, loyalty and treachery, survival and devastation. He convened an emergency council at dawn. The throne room, normally filled with ceremonial grandeur, felt tight, suffocating with the weight of imminent crisis. Advisors, generals, and scribes leaned over maps, letters, and tactical reports, every face reflecting the seriousness of the situation. The rebels are no longer merely reacting. Alexios began, his voice steady yet resonant with authority. They are orchestrating, coordinating, and exploiting every weakness. Our strategy must now combine swift action with careful anticipation. Today, every choice carries consequences far beyond the battlefield. Demetrios, standing rigid with concern, presented the latest intelligence. Sire, the rebels have launched simultaneous attacks on multiple towns, cutting off critical supply routes. Loyalist reinforcements are delayed by ambushes, and casualties are mounting among our frontline units. If decisive action is not taken, these forces may consolidate, potentially encouraging other provinces to rise in revolt. Alexios examined the maps with meticulous care, noting hills, river crossings, forests, and narrow passes that could be advantageous for ambushes or defense. Leadership in Byzantium required far more than strategic brilliance. It demanded foresight, psychological insight, and careful management of perception. Soldiers' morale, the loyalty of governors, and the ambitions of local nobles were as crucial as enemy movements. Every misstep could trigger cascading consequences across the empire. By late morning, loyalist forces clashed with rebel troops near one of the critical towns. The terrain amplified the danger. Narrow passes, cliffs, and dense forests turned every movement into a potential hazard. Casualties mounted rapidly, and the chaos of battle tested the discipline of even the most seasoned units. Reports flowed into the palace continuously. Alexios absorbed each one, issuing precise orders to redirect forces, fortify positions, and coordinate reinforcements. In Byzantium, perception was as important as action. A faltering defense could embolden rebels, while well-timed, decisive maneuvers could stabilize the region and maintain morale. Then came the most devastating news of the morning. A close advisor and lifelong companion, one who had fought alongside Alexios in earlier campaigns, had been killed in the ambush. The loss was a strategic blow, yes, but its personal weight was immeasurable. Loyalist units faltered upon hearing the news, and morale dipped dangerously. Alexios, though outwardly composed, felt the sting of responsibility. The lives of soldiers, civilians, and loyal governors depended on his decisions, and every casualty carried psychological as well as strategic consequences. Meanwhile, intelligence revealed additional treachery. A provincial governor, previously thought loyal, had been secretly providing supplies and information to the rebels. Alexios acted immediately, sending trusted officers to secure the governor's holdings, prevent further betrayal, and reassure the local population. Leadership required balancing justice with perception, ensuring punishment did not alienate loyal allies while safeguarding the empire from subversion. Amid this turmoil, a sliver of hope emerged. Several mid-ranking rebel leaders, disillusioned with their superiors' ambition and fearful of retribution, indicated willingness to surrender under specific conditions. Alexios recognized the opportunity but approached it with extreme caution. Envoys were dispatched under strict secrecy, carefully assessing sincerity and minimizing risk to loyalist troops. Byzantium had survived centuries by balancing diplomacy, perception, and force, and today demanded all three. By afternoon, the intensity of battle escalated. Loyalist forces, already stretched thin, were pushed to their limits. Villages were damaged, families displaced, and supply lines disrupted. Alexios monitored the situation relentlessly, issuing orders that balanced decisive action with preservation of life. Leadership was as much about managing fear, morale, and perception as about commanding armies. Every loss, every act of bravery, reverberated far beyond the battlefield, influencing the empire's perception of authority and strength. As evening fell, the crisis reached a turning point. One of the key towns partially fell to the rebels, forcing loyalist troops to retreat. The psychological impact on neighboring areas was immediate. Towns that had remained neutral now questioned the emperor's strength, and whispers of rebellion spread. Alexios orchestrated a counteroffensive, deploying mobile units to harass retreating rebels, stabilize the town, and restore confidence. Each maneuver required precision, coordination, and relentless vigilance. In Byzantium, authority depended on both reality and perception. One without the other could lead to disaster. Night descended, but Alexios' vigilance did not waver. Alone in his private chambers, candlelight flickering across maps and reports, he reflected on the day's events. Soldiers fallen, towns endangered, allies wavering, and traitors threatening stability from within. The weight of command pressed on him with relentless force. The life of an emperor demanded unceasing vigilance, foresight, and careful judgment. Picture standing beside him in the quiet halls, absorbing reports, weighing strategies, and feeling the immense pressure of responsibility. Every decision could inspire confidence or sow doubt, stabilize the empire or provoke further rebellion, reward loyalty or inadvertently encourage treachery. And remember, the rebellion is far from over. Tomorrow will bring new crises, betrayals, and challenges that will test Alexios' skill, judgment, and endurance more than any day before. The story of an emperor is defined not by a single victory, but by the relentless negotiation of power, perception, and the fragile endurance of an empire teetering on the edge of upheaval. The dawn broke over Constantinople with an eerie stillness, a quiet that belied the storm gathering across the Bosporus. The city stirred slowly, merchants calling out their wares, and the distant tolling of church bells echoing through the streets. Yet inside the palace, tension was palpable. Messengers arrived breathless, scribes scurried to record every report, and generals paced with grim determination. Alexios, already exhausted from days of unbroken vigilance, knew that today's decisions could determine not only the fate of armies and towns, but the very stability of the empire. He summoned an urgent morning council. The throne room, adorned with mosaics depicting past emperors and epic battles, felt constricted under the weight of imminent crisis. Advisors, generals, and scribes gathered around tables covered with maps, letters, and tactical reports, each face reflecting the gravity of the moment. The rebels are no longer testing us. They are striking with intent, coordination, and precision. Alexios said, his voice calm but resolute. Every action we take today must be deliberate, strategic, and anticipatory. We cannot afford mistakes. Our empire depends on it. Demetrios, standing stiff with concern, presented the latest intelligence. Sire, the rebels have launched simultaneous attacks on multiple towns. Supply lines are severed, isolated units face annihilation, and loyalist reinforcements are delayed by ambushes. If we fail to act decisively, the rebellion could gain momentum and inspire other provinces to rise. Alexios traced the routes across maps, noting hills, forests, rivers, and narrow passes that could be used to defend or trap forces. Leadership in Byzantium required more than military expertise. It demanded foresight, psychological insight, and careful management of perception. The morale of soldiers, the loyalty of governors, and the ambitions of local nobles were as critical as enemy movements. A single misjudgment could trigger cascading consequences across the empire. By mid-morning, loyalist forces engaged the rebels near a strategically vital town. The terrain amplified danger. Narrow passes, cliffs, and dense forests turned every maneuver into a potential trap. Casualties rose rapidly, and even the most disciplined units struggled to maintain cohesion. Reports streamed incessantly to the palace. Alexios absorbed each one, issuing precise orders to redirect troops, fortify positions, and coordinate reinforcements. In Byzantium, perception was as vital as reality. A faltering defense could embolden rebels, while decisive maneuvers could maintain confidence and authority. Then came the worst news of the day. A trusted advisor and lifelong companion had been killed in the fighting. Alexios felt a deep personal loss. Strategically critical, yes, but emotionally devastating. Loyalist units faltered upon hearing the news, and morale plummeted. The emperor understood the psychological dimension of command. Each casualty carried weight beyond the battlefield, influencing the perception of strength, loyalty, and authority across the empire. Amid the chaos, a further betrayal was revealed. A provincial governor, previously considered loyal, had been secretly supplying rebels with provisions and intelligence. Alexios acted immediately, sending trusted officers to secure the governor's holdings and prevent further treachery, while reassuring the local population. Leadership required balancing justice with perception, ensuring punishment did not alienate allies while safeguarding the empire from subversion. At the same time, whispers suggested that several mid-ranking rebel leaders were willing to defect, frustrated by their superiors and fearful of reprisal. Alexios saw opportunity but approached it cautiously. Envoys were sent under strict secrecy, testing loyalty while minimizing risk to loyalist forces. Byzantium's survival had always depended on balancing diplomacy, perception, and military power, and today demanded all three. By afternoon, the battles intensified. Loyalist forces, already stretched thin, faced relentless attacks. Villages were damaged, civilians displaced, and supply lines disrupted. Alexios monitored the situation with unceasing vigilance, issuing orders that balanced immediate military necessity with the preservation of life. Leadership in Byzantium required managing fear, morale, and loyalty as much as directing armies. Each loss or act of bravery reverberated far beyond the battlefield, shaping perception across the empire. Evening brought a critical turning point. One of the key towns partially fell to the rebels, forcing loyalist troops to withdraw. The psychological impact on surrounding areas was immediate. Towns that had remained neutral began to question the emperor's strength, and whispers of rebellion spread. Alexios orchestrated a counteroffensive, deploying mobile units to harass retreating rebels, stabilize the town, and restore confidence. Each maneuver required precision, coordination, and relentless vigilance. In Byzantium, authority depended as much on perception as on force. Night descended, but Alexios' vigilance did not waver. In his private chambers, candlelight flickered across maps, letters, and reports, casting shadows that mirrored the fragile state of the empire. He reflected on the day's events: the soldiers lost, towns endangered, allies wavering, and traitors threatening stability from within. The weight of command pressed on him relentlessly. Leadership demanded unceasing vigilance, foresight, and careful judgment. Picture standing beside him in those quiet, candlelit halls, absorbing reports, weighing strategies, and feeling the immense pressure of responsibility. Every decision could inspire confidence or sow doubt, stabilize the empire or provoke further rebellion, reward loyalty or inadvertently encourage treachery. And remember, the rebellion is far from over. Tomorrow will bring new crises, betrayals, and challenges that will test Alexios' strategic skill, moral judgment, and emotional endurance more than any day before. The story of an emperor is defined not by a single victory, but by the relentless negotiation of power, perception, and the fragile endurance of an empire on the edge of upheaval.